I'll dive into a whirlwind discussion on the calibration front. Okay. So each year when I deliver the boot camp, I try to deliver some discussion on, oh, that's over here, on resources for further study and wrap up, and ways of further staying connected with this material. My comments here are a grab bag of materials, but I'm hoping that Jeff can chime in and that we can get questions from the audience as well, or further requests. So in this case, what I'm going to do is to just cite a few resources. Jason, could you try to adjust this so it can more over here? Yeah. So in terms of further education, there's a quite nice course on model thinking that some of my students have taken on Coursera. Some of you may be interested in this. It's not a modeling course per se, but it's a course on using models to sharpen thinking. Scott Page is a valued colleague, was, and I think he still is, the head of the Center for Complex Systems at Michigan, someone with whom I have a great deal of respect, for whom I have a great deal of respect. It's a very thoughtful course that some of my students have benefited from. Here at the U of S, I do hold a semester-long course, CMPT 858, which I've been evolving towards being increasingly hard-hitting in the area of training for these sorts of models. It covers notably system dynamics as well as agent-based modeling and a smattering of discrete event modeling. The boot camps where you're here for this August one, still hoping to get sort of a basic one, which is more along the lines of what Ashish was saying, reading and understanding models, understanding intention for models, reasoning about them and using them effectively without building them. I've heard some good things about Volker Grimm's course at Humboldt State University in California. Volker Grimm is a thoughtful ecologist who's contributed a great deal in the dynamic area. Jason, can you hold on? Thanks. In the area of applications of ABM and modeling, has published on this area in the pages of Science on the use of pattern-oriented modeling for agent-based modeling, and is generally a thoughtful contributor. He also has a book by Steve Railsback, co-authored with Steve Railsback, that I'll come back to. There's a variety of packages out there. I've taught in this course for wanting to teach some hands-on understanding to illustrate particular concepts with AnyLogic. I think, just as I think agent-based modeling is the worst of all alternatives except for everything else, or dynamic modeling for addressing its needs, I think AnyLogic is the worst of all platforms except everything else for agent-based modeling. Winchell and I both profess sort of a love-hate relationship with AnyLogic. We see all of its warts and all of its shortcomings, all of its needless sacrifice of where it could have achieved greatness. At the same time, when we look at all the alternatives, it's a pretty easy choice. It continues to be an easy choice. It has some costs. One of the primary disadvantages cost-wise is, well, disadvantages in terms of it is the cost. And, you know, it requires Java, as you've seen, which is a distraction for many models, and is, in my view, it's a fairly poor language to use for modeling. At the same time, it does have quite declarative model specification you can share with stakeholders, reusable somewhat reusable model pieces, and this large example of health models I've shared. There's a variety of other platforms. Repast is a platform where one of the earliest platforms in which I did dynamic modeling back around 2000, 2001. I did my early work around 1990 and onwards in a different package than that. Repast is basically, it's what we call a library for modeling. I consider it very unpleasant for people who are not computer scientists. Winchell considers it very broken. It's put together in a poor way by people who are not real software engineers. And I have to say, I tend to agree with Winchell. It makes me weep as a computer scientist, virtually, and almost in reality, because we can do so much better as a discipline. It's just, it's horrible. It's horrible. I don't mean repast, just the current state of the field. It's really not good. Models should be transparent and able to be modified very readily by stakeholders from a lot of different backgrounds. Any logic comes close but falls short in certain regards, in the opacity of certain little bits of it. It's challenging, as you've seen. It's not easy. And it's gratuitously not easy. And we know how to do so much better as computer scientists if I can only get the resources to make it happen. But I'm not in the first in history to feel that. NetLogo is a free platform, very popular for illustrating agent-based modeling, very popular for education. It's recommended by a nice interface. It has, in terms of using its interface, a shallow learning curve. It's made for beginners, and it's a pretty good accompanying book. I have a great respect for NetLogo. I first encountered NetLogo's ancestor in 1990. And I took the path less traveled. And sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had influenced it, because it was growing elsewhere at MIT while I was at a different place at MIT. It was growing the media lab. I was in the lab for computer science. And both of us were growing for a fateful collision many years later. NetLogo has a horrible language. Its language is abominable. Java is bad. Its language is worse. Building models from scratch in NetLogo requires fortitude of constitution, and it's not for the lighthearted. Meanwhile, Java has extensive learning support online. It's just massive numbers of courses and learning opportunities for it. NetLogo does not scale. It does not scale for larger models. It's considered by modelers who do really serious modeling to be kind of for toy small models, for illustrating things, and for education. Ladies and gentlemen, we can do so much better. We can do so much better. After all these years, for us to be in this position is pathetic. LogGen is a popular platform, somewhat popular platform for microsimulation modeling. It's fast, free, quasi-declarative for output specification, has a bio browser, highly scalable for a large number of agents. It's performant. I consider it quite unpleasant to program. And if you're not a computer scientist, you're going to be at a real disadvantage. It has poor support for parallelization, last I've seen. Insight Maker is something Jeff has shown us. Flexible, runs in a browser on different browsers. It can be used for qualitative modeling and quantitative. Supports system dynamics and kinda, if you squint at it, ABM. And it is fewer supporting tools, but you should talk with Jeff if you want to learn more about it, because he knows incomparably more than I. Conferences. I go to SBP every year. I'm highly involved with SBP, Social Computing Behavioral Cultural Prediction and Modeling. It's a nice small conference. Social scientists, health scientists, computer scientists, quite a bit of agent-based modeling, quite a lot of machine learning. We presented our opioid stuff there, et cetera. Kind of friendly environment, quite open, Washington, D.C. every summer. Winter simulation conference, mostly discrete event modelers, some agent-based, some system dynamics. Tends to be a lot of simulation folks, some applied folks, some folks on the domain side. Microsimulation International, this is for microsimulation modeling. International Conference NSD tends to be pretty inbred, focus on SD, and traditionally they have some accommodation for agent-based modeling. Although, as Jeff Riley noted one year, those of us who go there and present on ABM seem to be stuffed into small rooms and forced to deal with congestion and crowding, almost as if it's wished upon us. And for those else, for in the health side, the international conference on health informatics, I find for some stuff it's okay, but you get a lot of non-simulation there. The real truth of the matter is there's not a great conference for simulation modeling in health, for dynamic modeling for health, agent-based modeling in health. Maybe I should found one, but you know, it's a lot of work to run these conferences, and it's a lot of money, and it requires a lot of time, and that time is opportunity cost. It would be a good contribution if someone could found a high-quality conference in that area. There's some good books on ABM. You know, computational social science and this book by Railsbeck and Graham are decent. There's books recently that have come out from Sandra Galea and his colleague who just ran for governor of Michigan, Tarek. I can't remember the full name. They have a thoughtful book. I have some work in there. There's another book by George Kaplan on growing inequalities. It's the application of dynamic modeling to understanding of health disparities. I contributed 3 or 4 chapters in there, but there's a wide variety of contributors. In the system dynamics area, I'm quite partial to business dynamics. I refer a lot of my students to that, despite the name. It has a variety of examples in it. And is a thoughtful book covering some of the quantitative and qualitative side. Peter Hoffman's community-based system dynamics book is just great for those interested in qualitative modeling and group model building, particularly in community settings. And this book by John Moorcraft, I've been fairly impressed with, and I think Jeff thinks fairly highly of it. AnyLogic.com has a big book of simulation, which systematically goes over AnyLogic and provides resources for learning AnyLogic. Worth a look if you're going to do serious AnyLogic work. I have, for those who haven't discovered it, I have a YouTube channel, which has somewhere between 2,000 and 2,500 videos now. The number is growing over time, even as this boot camp runs. It has posted materials there in some of my websites. I have screencasts from the boot camps. I have other lectures and tutorials. Sometimes I give tutorials for my group, and I try to put them online. And increasingly, I try to do live events. So people, I don't know who they are, but they join. And then they watch me. And they can be useful. Sometimes they say, like, your sound is not on. And I say, oh, sorry. And I'll turn it on. It's quite good. My YouTube videos are pretty broad. And the biggest problem with them is there are too many of them. There's just huge numbers. On any one topic, that's a huge number. I'll tell you the secret. For the past year and a half or so, I've been systematically recording my best videos, like writing down the best ones. And I've been doing that in hopes of showing them to others, sharing them. Check if I have a favorites playlist. If so, you'll find my best videos on there. On a particular topic, I say, okay, I nailed it that time. Now, how I think nailed it might not be your nailed it, but it'll probably be better than other times. Some on there are not the best, some are better. And these ones tend to be quite good. If you can't find that, let me know, and I will post them separately. Those are times where I'm able to communicate a concept, I feel, with clarity. I'm able to point to a variety of concrete examples. There are just times I give a lecture with particular lucidity and can feel that it's communicated effectively. And so those are, occasionally there are probably some high energy moments in there, because often when I communicate with lucidity, it encourages enthusiasm on my part, and so sometimes I will leap in response. Okay. Insight Maker. Jeff has just so many thoughtful contributions there. I think they're really worth the look. I just marvel at their thoughtfulness. I mean, it's really interesting stuff. Just a lot packed in there. I don't know, is Systems Wiki still a... Okay. Malware? Was it killed by malware? What is it? I see. Okay. In Sydney. Yeah. Now, this site. So there's a story here. Starting about 4 years ago, Jeff and I realized that what needs to be done for this event, the most important things for these events, the most important things, realizing the outcomes for these events, are not something per se at the event. This is a systems thought, a systems thinking type reflection. The most important mediator for success of these events and realizing their goals is what happens after the event. I told you, from the streets of Sydney, walking back and forth parallel to Coogee Bay, Jeff commented that you don't know if a boot camp succeeded until 6 months after the boot camp. And wiser words I've only occasionally heard. So we put together, coming out of this boot camp, a site which we paid for out of, actually I paid for out of personal funds to support the boot camps. And the boot camp, because I give boot camps around the world, and I wanted a site to support it. And so we built a site based on a system that was called ELG, based on a student who could build this for us. And long story short, it's been a longer story than I'd like. It kind of didn't get done in time, and the student didn't want to do it, and then the student said to do it, and then they backed out again, and then the NIH, we got an NIH grant, an R25, which I co-wrote with Elizabeth Brook and Russ Hammond, which brought a substantial sum of money for it, but where the work had to be done in the U.S. So we had to transfer all that work to the U.S., and we had to instead of being a boot camp site, it had to be a site for the entire health modeling community with the NIH's blessing. And the NIH said that they would put their stamp of approval on it and launch it as an official NIH, resource with their blessing and with the recognition of the reliable character of the resources. And part of this was they said it's too boot camp oriented. We need to make it less boot camp oriented. Yeah, because I gave it to them after all this personal investment. Yeah, it was boot camp oriented. But they said, okay, we have to, lessen your footprint on it and so on. And Jeff said another set of even wiser words to me. Can't remember when he said these, but it was here in Saskatoon, I think. He said, "It's amazing what you can get done in life if you don't care who gets credit." That's really true. So yeah, what the heck? We'll get away from things too specific to the boot camp. So there's a lot of stuff being eliminated, but I'd like to show you the site because I truly believe it's going to come soon. It's going a little bit slowly, but this is it. Okay. I'm going to log out of it, and it's most of the way done. My student Kurt Kruger, here's the NIH seal of approval there, and you can see it as a set of communities here. It's an online community geared towards our community for health systems modeling, and there's limited amounts you can do publicly with this, okay? But if you log in, and I'd ask you not do it quite yet. We're hopefully to launch this in the next few months. But basically, you can engage in sharing of models, of lectures, which include videos. You can learn about partnerships or advertise for partnerships, people you'd like to join your team. You can find partner for specific work or for an ongoing project. So you have a one-off thing, you want to convert your model from NetLogo to AnyLogic. You look for specific work. You want, by contrast, someone to join your team as a lead modeler for this project that you're getting going. You might find a partner for the project. And here, you might specify you want project summary and themes and what are the details they should know and what are some summaries and some skills you're looking for. Is anyone existing fulfilling it? So I had to plan this all out in terms of like the scheme of what you deal with. Similar for funding announcements, you can advertise a funding opportunity through different resources within different jurisdictions. There's opportunities to post messages in a forum to get questions asked about particular types, and there's certain types of questions, say a model implementation or trade-offs between system science methods and model conceptualization, aspects of model design, etc. There's events you can learn about, including some events in a certain area, say within 100 miles of your area. It's US-centric, so they're still using the imperial system. You can link to online resources and online videos others have shown. You can view a sort of a dashboard photo. You can look at uploads and status updates, as well as just recent activity here. Now, the information here is currently somewhat historically based. Jeff will recognize some of the faces here as coming from the U of S. There's Winchell, for example, that is being followed by Julie Maurer, etc. We're hoping to launch this soon, and we're hoping to use it to catalyze communities. One of the most important features of it that I planned in there from the start was we want, this is what they call a Web 2.0 site. This is not a static site. This is a site people go to and post things. You see an activity feed, like on social media. You see what's going on. You can go create a community. You can invite people to your community. And within that community, share resources you wouldn't share with the broader community of logged-in users or with the public community, et cetera. Some of these communities are closed. Some are open in other words, by invitation only. Others are public. Or others, allow anyone in can join it. So you can have invitations in place. You can follow people, et cetera. This site, I believe, will be quite important. We're putting a lot of effort into getting some initial materials on it, to making sure the launch has enough stuff to really attract people and hopefully catalyze the community around it. One of the most important things you folks could do to make this site a success and use it as a gathering point to stay in touch after this event is to join it when it comes out and to participate in it. Because there's a real danger here. This site, like many others, will die because nobody goes there anymore. And once a site gets in that death spiral, people say, oh, it's all old stuff, I'm not going to go there anymore, it just becomes more old, and it plummets to the ground, and it never gets off the ground again. This is a well-known anti-pattern in community launching. So you folks could actually help with this. We'll connect you with this site when it's launched, which should be soon, and we can use it to stay in touch about materials. I'll be posting models to this on a regular basis. This is going to be one of the common duties in my lab, is to just get models on there, get videos on there, post events on here, learn about funding opportunities on here, try to match up people who are seeking partners on here, et cetera. I'm hoping this will be a vibrant community, and you folks could help make it so. Okay? Coming soon to a site near you. Okay? I think it's going to be big. With the NIH's gift to it, they're going to be promoting it, et cetera. Let's see if we can make it work. But I'm not putting all my eggs in that basket. I think it's going to be a good thing. I think it will bring the field to a level of interconnection that's going to be important step for the future. In the meantime, finding partners is really important. This work is not a spectator sport. It requires participation, and it's a team sport. These events bring together people from particular backgrounds and expose them to people from different backgrounds. And one of the goals for sustainability, or the hallmarks of sustainability in this area, is to find complementary partners. And there's networking opportunities among your class participants you've taken opportunities for, and tomorrow there's more. There may be opportunities for modelers that I know, people like Kirk Kruger, who recently graduated from my lab, who might be interested. Narges has worked on several projects, for example, with external partners, and continues to do so. Conferences are a good place for that. Some of those conferences I mentioned are full conferences. And there's this opportunity of student teams from my classes that, for example, Cheryl's taken advantage of. And I've mentioned that site. Here at the U of S, we do have a lot going on. I very deliberately stirred up an ecosystem around the U of S. And I'm even missing some things now. There's internships as well, and there's hiring and student exchange. These are different modes of interaction with us. Some people have elected to work directly. Some previous boot camps have elected to work directly with some of our students. They've hired Winchell, they hired Kurt, hired Narges, for example. Aiden's been hired before for certain work. So direct contracts with students. We have class projects. Most years, I teach CMPT 898 and in 394, and students come to me looking for projects. They want to undertake a project for the course. Cheryl's supervised a couple of them to very good effect. They've gone forward, delivered interesting things. And if you're looking for a project, it doesn't cost any money. It takes a bit of time. You have to meet with the team 5 or more times a semester. Give them some guidance. Give them some points of reference, feedback, etc. Incubators. Tomorrow we're going to be working in an incubation capacity. We're talking about having a full week incubator at some point, just incubator. Hackathons. We've been doing this 3 to 5 day sponsored hackathons. Different student teams all work in a given area, create alternative solutions, alternative models addressing a given area. I think it has huge promise. It's shown its huge promise already, demonstrated its promise. It's been a great success already, and I think it has a bright future. Sponsoring hackathons, large number of students. It's not cheap, but it can be very effective. It does require physical participation by stakeholders to be effective. Internships. Jeff has brought over, gosh, how many now? Lynn would be able to count immediately. 5-ish students to Sydney. They've gone through visa issues. They've had to navigate the Australian visa system. And done so successfully. Some of those internships, such as Wade's, put in place some foundations for good future work. Several students are over there now. These internships have great potential. You know, if they're not outside of Canada, they're even easier. If they are outside of Canada, one has to go through border issues, but they're doable, and Jeff has navigated them. If you're interested, you could talk with Jeff about this. If they're out of the country, they take some effort. Winchell worked for a group doing modeling at one point for, I think, gosh, 8 months or something like that. Alex was there for 8 months now. Collaborations, there's opportunities for collaborating in areas. Whilst I've been at this boot camp, I got email from a vet science collaborator from 6 years ago or something. Do you remember Carmel Witt? Yeah. Tasmanian Devils. Yeah. I mean, to model them, not to say. Yeah. Contracts with CEFL, we do contract work, direct or subcontracts as part of larger grants. Hiring of students, we're always looking to get our students placed in good career options that could let them continue this work. And finally, student exchange. We are talking with Western Sydney right now about possible exchange agreements with U of S. The conversation has been initiated with some good promise. We're putting in touch the requisite people on both sides so that, on the administrative side, so they can talk. On our side, there's a lot of enthusiasm. There seems to be quite a lot on the Western Sydney side to have students be able to go between the two institutions more easily. So whether it's people coming here to have capacity building, could go back, or us sending people to Western Sydney, there's some potential, and we'd be thinking about that with other contexts as well. I would just note this semester-long course that I teach. I have, in response to questions, I have offered this with distance learning options. So I've done that for several previous students from other countries, in fact, it's not without its barriers. one has to be very careful about the IT, get everything down, make sure questions can get heard, figure out how coursework, project work can be accommodated, etc. But it's a good option. It's a good option. Okay. It's not a prereq. It's not a prereq, but it's a darn good exposure. I mean, it can get you in a really good, good setting. And in fact, many of things you learned here would put you in really, will give you a leg up for getting started in that class in a big way. So some of the sort of experience with any logic, it's the sort of things the student has to build up in the class. Sorry? There is an exam. I will share with you that the talks are early on about an adaptation of this course for the School of Public Health, which would be explicitly aimed at health scientists seeking to learn principles of system science and health. And that course will probably look different. Actually, 858, the graduate version of the course has no exam. The undergraduate version has an exam, as is required by our rules. So the graduate version has a project. The project is required. For undergrads, the project is optional. The exam is required. For graduate students, the project is required, but the exam is optional. Yeah. Yes, I have my videos from my class up. Yeah, yeah. Yep. Some on the public YouTube channel, as I am warned. Yeah. And that class continues to evolve. I'm continuing to refine it to make it harder hitting yet, and to increase its substance. I think I'm going to have a health scientist-oriented fork of it, so that we have two different courses. But I have to navigate the fact that I can only do that by increasing my course load, going up from 3 to 4 courses a year, which, I'm willing to win one for the Gipper, but I got to do so when I'm in a position to deliver for the Gipper. Okay, so those are some thoughts. The truth is, we've hoped that this boot camp could be a regathering point each year, a point for people to come together. And we had some explicit mechanisms in the past to help ease that. But cost situation made it imperative that we make it self-sustaining first. And, I think Jeff and I are both absolutely determined to try to make these sort of events more than discrete events. They should be about connecting with a community that you can stay in touch with on an ongoing basis. And Jeff and I next week will be meeting much time. And as soon as Saturday night, we'll be strategizing as the way to fully knit people together given the updated situation and so on. But I guess the other piece of it is my boot camps worldwide, right? So these are overseas boot camps. Right now we are starting to talk about a boot camp in Brisbane for 2019 first half. Maybe that will happen. I am very open to sponsor boot camps. If you want me to come with 1 or 2 students to give a boot camp, on some health topic, I focus the discussion on that health topic. I adapt the materials, the examples, try to give case studies drawn from that area, etc., to address those particular needs. And it tends to be fairly good in terms that I can really address a particular health area. So I'm going to go give one for communicable disease, for example, or give one for chronic disease, particularly focused on obesity. I can give examples for that. or mental health and addictions issues. I can give examples for that. And they tend to be very effective when you can tailor it. The real challenge of giving boot camps away from here, the foremost challenge, is TA support. Here, we benefit greatly from the presence of TAs. Profoundly. Case studies, project help, circulation within the classroom. And for a boot camp to be effective overseas, I need to take at least one and sometimes two TAs. And it's very hard to do an incubator overseas, unless you have very few people and a couple of TAs. So anyway, that's the current situation. Any discussion you want to have about this? These are sort of resources and suggestions. The launch of the site, I'm hoping, will be a watershed event for our community. But are there any ways that we could better meet your needs, or any questions we can ask? Yeah. So I teach software estimation to my students in my software engineering class. And, in addition to doing time boxing, dividing things up into small chunks and estimating them, where you're less likely to fool yourself, but where the project evolves a lot as shifting perceptions of needs are there, so you don't know, how far you'll be a year from now, because it depends what comes up. I think modeling is quite a bit like that. The other technique we use in software, we use implicitly here, which is estimation by decomposition. You take it apart into pieces, and you ask, how long is this going to take? How long is that going to take? But that's far, far, far easier to do for a small chunk of work. Because over the long run, you learn from models. You don't learn nearly as much. I talk as someone who's a professional software engineer for years and have written many, many hundreds of thousands of lines of code. And I don't learn nearly as much from a software project as I do from a model. It's not that I don't learn. I learn a lot from a software project. I learn about process issues. I learn about thinking on the abstraction side, about how to do things cleverly. But it just can't compare with what I learned from a model. What I learned from a model is often much, much, much richer. It sharpens my thinking about the way things work in the world. And in as much as you learn from the model, it shapes where to go next with the model. And so while I could try to estimate a larger project, there's a lot of things that's very hard to estimate. How long calibration will take. Your learning and calibration, how long is that going to take? How long it will take for you to get the data you need to put it into the model. To what degree a given characterization will really be viable. If you're going to be able to find other models that will give you an understanding of the structure that's needed for this part of a model. Unless you've done a lot of basic thinking and so on, and sort of planning on where you want to go, it's going to be very hard to estimate those. And even if you do that planning, where you go will be contingent on your learning along the way and on the stakeholder feedback. So I'm actually skeptical of the ability to estimate a large modeling project that's highly responsive to stakeholder needs and reasonably complicated over more than a couple months. I'm skeptical of the ability to do that reliably. Now, if there are people who do it because they'll plan to do it a certain way. You know, they'll say, okay, I'm going to do it this way. This is the model. And I have to say, I mean, there are projects that are smaller where I say, okay, this is what I want to do, and I put it into place, and it all works fine, and it's nice, and everyone's happy, and we get what we want. There's no question I can do that for small projects. But for large projects where there's a lot of uncertainty and thinking, and it's hard to do. It's really hard to do for an experienced modeler like me. And given the nature of modeling, unless you have almost a template that you put down, and there are modelers who will do this. I won't use names, but you know, there's certain modelers who will, they have their way of doing this thing, and they'll put it down there. As I said earlier, one recognizes the lion by his claw. You know, you just recognize, oh yeah, that's his way of doing things, and it's a very standard way of doing things. It's just like, yeah, I know what the model will look like ahead of time, because, and particularly for SD modeling, this is particularly notable because often it's, I mean, the way things are done, often it's a pretty standard structure. For agent-based modeling, so much depends on the scope. So much depends on what's cut out and what's left in. And that depends, in turn, on some of the learning you do. You know, I think I could do an okay job estimating something within, you know, if it's going to finish within 6 months. But I don't trust it that much, and I think there's big error bars. So I'm just telling you my honest perception of it. I think it's hard, and you know, software engineering is a discipline. Software development, they had this kind of fad for a while of related to estimation, COCOMO and function points, and these ways of trying to estimate software. And I don't put a lot of faith in it. It works okay for certain types of systems, but not for other types, etc. Yeah, I just don't think we're there for modeling, because so much of modeling is learning, and so much of modeling is, it's hard to know how long it will take. Like calibration being a good example. You know, we try to calibrate to it's not working. What does that mean? Sometimes I try to calibrate a model, it doesn't calibrate. I learn the model needs to be changed. It does not accord with these patterns. I have to go back and change it. I have to go back and think where to change it. I try a different one. I try recalibrating. That takes time. I have to gather evidence for that new portion of the model. I have to talk to stakeholders about adding it, etc. Altering model assumptions, increasing the model boundary. There's a lot of cost to that sometimes. Or I discovered the data sources are flawed. That's happened about 4 or 5 times in my life. It just won't match the data. And I think this model has serious problems. We're going to have to change something. And then it turns out I discovered the data was wrong. People tell me, oh, those years were unreliable. Or they tell me it got redefined, what it meant, what this certain term meant was redefined as of that year. Or they temporarily used a term which was not previously used, and that ended up getting folded into the statistics for those years onwards or whatever. All these different times you learn that the data isn't what you thought. Because data is often made in a sausage factory of unpleasant, of limited hygiene. That exhibits limited hygiene and limited cleaning schedule. And even, you know, administrative data. It's horrible. It's horrible. You know, the administrative data I know and love, it records, you know, ICD-9 codes or things, or records, you know, reasons for visits, for billing, physicians billing, and it's entered sometimes by a secretary who has no training in medical coding and says, oh, the person was in, what do you say, diabetes? Okay, what the hell? I'll put in diabetes, what, type, well, type 1, I guess. I don't know. I got to go to lunch now, and it turns out they were in for, gestational diabetes, and suddenly it's turned into diabetes type 1 or something like that. And and modeling projects have to deal with this sometimes, right? Just like data science projects have to do with it. So the short answer is, Ashish, I'm skeptical of the idea that you can really well estimate a modeling project because of the huge amount of learning, because it needs to shift with that learning with stakeholder feedback. I think the right way is to do it agilely, where you estimate in a couple week chunks, and you see how long it takes. And you end up at some point saying, okay, that's enough for that, now let's turn to this other thing. But I'm not satisfied by my answer to you, and I'll think about it. I mean, maybe there is some way we could do better estimation, but I need to give it some thought. Yeah. No. Yeah, I'm much more in the latter category. Much more in the latter category. At the same time, I try to avoid analysis paralysis by just saying I'm going to plan out the entire system in intricate detail, because often that runs afoul of agile development flexibility and so on. I used to, when I was young, I used to map it all out in intricate detail in the software systems. And I realized it's fallible. I miss things. And very importantly, you often miss, opportunities for stakeholder feedback that corrects your understanding of the requirements, et cetera. So, no, I'm a big believer in thinking ahead of time, conceptualization exercises, et cetera. I'm not a believer in just putting your fingers on the keyboard and just trying to, yeah, let's do this. What the heck? No, you want to think ahead of time. You want to think, okay, where does this need to go? What needs to be in the model for us to achieve this next goal? And then probably have it be a bit of a group discussion, and then try it, and learn from that. Yeah. So yeah, just getting and hacking. I mean, especially because so much of these models now, it's easy sometimes, particularly with other frameworks than AnyLogic. Oh, what does that button do? Particularly with other frameworks besides AnyLogic, it's one of the real dangers is you don't see the underlying model, kind of the concepts of the model, because the software engineering gets in your way. So this is terrible in repast. And if you look at a net logo model, its definition, it's terrible. You can't see it because there's all these welter of things in the way. You can't see the forest for the trees. You can't see what is being depicted because all you see is the how. And this is one of the problems when you start just like hacking out a model. You get caught up in how you're doing it sometimes, and you're losing track of what am I trying to capture here? What's the elegant way to capture this? Where am I really going with this? What's the scope I'm aiming at? And with something like agent-based modeling, it can be deadly because you just start throwing in these things. I don't know if I'm going to need this. What the heck? I'll put it in there. I'll put it in there, and you end up going down a rabbit hole that you're not going to come out of.
We are just forced into that because they wouldn't let me compile more than 3 times.
Oh yeah, no, I'm familiar with this. But yeah, I'm not a big believer in just hack it out. In fact, it took me a long time to accept the wording of hackathon. I really didn't like that. Now, I'll tell you, the MIT community, hacker is a different meaning and so on, but often it had the connotation of someone just gets in and hacks rather than really thinking it through. Not always, but, and I think it's dangerous. I think you want to think it through where you can, but you don't want to be so paralyzed you don't have an opportunity to learn, and you're fixated within the limits of your current thinking, because often you try something and you learn something from it. You have more realizations. We learn as we do sometimes, but it's worth. Dwight Eisenhower said. I like to quote Dwight Eisenhower on a couple fronts, but one of the things he said that planning is nothing, the plan is nothing, planning is everything. Clausewitz said, no plan survives contact with the enemy. But you need to plan, because the plan, amongst other things, gives you a reference point for things to go off of. And you've thought through some elements of the situation, and you have a common point of understanding to innovate off of, etc. Yeah, I'm a believer in that. Yeah, I think there's a little bit of the scope of the model that I'm aiming at, and what needs to be in the model to address the interventions that I'm aiming at. What needs to be in the model to get the outputs I'm interested in, to compare with empirical data, or otherwise to assess the outcomes of interest. Those are, and in fact, it's exactly in my model conceptualization exercises, things to think about that you should be asking yourself. That's what I think about. But don't try to say then, it's a mistake to say, okay, I've thought those all through, then let's put them all in. No, you put them in one by one, and you learn, and you run, and you show, and you see the results. You think through, okay, really, is this the next highest priority? Or you get sent off in a different direction by the stakeholder or what have you. I like to quote Mark Heffernan, always be 1/2 hour from a running model, as conveyed by Wade. Tyler, you had a question. It's just an example model I give you. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we have several models that remind me a little bit of that. There's certainly some where we set the people's connections directly from a file that we read in. There's others where we have, it's actually people escalate number of partners and de-escalate. This is an STI example. And when they change partners over time. That's in the example models I give you. STIs, yeah. But like a maximum number, yeah, I mean, there's a classic thing called the ring lattice network where everyone's connected with a certain number of other people, 2 or 4 or 6. And I certainly build models sometimes which feature that as a kind of extreme example. But if you're here tomorrow, I mean, we could show you that. I mean, Wade back there, or Windchill, or probably Tina, maybe Narges, could show you models where you actually add people's connections manually. I mean, it's very easy to do any logic. You say, like, connect this person with their mother. And there's a connection made. And so we build models, like that. The question is, what's the generative algorithm for the network? Like, what is it that gives rise to the network? And there's different network types that use different things. But a ring lattice network is one that has a fixed number of connections per person. Another one is a Poisson random network, which is a ring line, excuse me, what am I saying? Sorry, take that back. It's a horrible misstatement. A small world network. A small world network starts with a ring lattice network. Each person has a random number of connections. And then those connections get rewired. So it's like most of my connections are with people nearby, but I have a few connections with people worldwide. So a few of my connections get rewired to people across the network. And that's supported in AnyLogic as a built-in network type. And that has defined, I believe it's fair to say that it's defined connections number, although there's a question in my mind about the algorithm that I'm not sufficiently awake to answer. But that would be a good starting point. And any of the TAs could help you with that. Yeah, small world networks, they're inspired by the fact that even though most of our connections are local, we have a few distant connections. That makes all the difference for infection transmission or meme transmission or whatever. Because we can, with 6 hops, I can get to someone anywhere in the world, just about. Yeah. Good. Other questions, comments? Yes, Kenny. Oh, man. That's very kind. Yeah. 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 Oh, the quote from Kierkegaard?
Yes.
Yeah, so we live forward but learn backwards? Yeah.
So I was just wondering whether
Yeah.
if you had like a really good model of some of these techniques,
Mm.
say well, the power decision has changed relative to this old model. Here's the consequences. In other words, we built this great model, great data. Yes, it cost us. Yes, it cost us. Look at what we've achieved. What we've built here. Evidence based ourselves. Our say. Relative use of evidence and others. So I'm just wondering what would be that take-home action for the model.
Good question. I mean, like really nicely written up case studies that make that case.
Yeah, like a really nice case to say the value proposition.
I know of case studies that are kind of like that, where there's the case we made. Now, the challenge, as you might expect, is the counterfactual, right? Because you took this detour to go on the modeling route. What would have happened otherwise? Now, there are some cases where you might be able to assess that. For example, if you had just continued on the status quo, it's patent. Thanks a ton. Sorry for the trouble, Jason. If you had just continued on, we would have ended up in a bad way, without this model, because this would have happened at this point. This unforeseen weather event came about, and it would have knocked us for a loop without the model planning, but because of it, we were able to avoid that problem. There's a couple examples that come to mind. What I'm about that sort of thing. Some including infectious disease transmission, some health system planning. The real question in my mind is that crisply written up in a place? that can be, beautifully documented. I'm not positive in the health sphere. Now, beyond the health sphere, there's a lot of testimony from, say, companies who have engaged in this as to how it's helped them. I mean, one of the things the system dynamics world used to trot out regularly was Shell's example during the oil embargo days and sort of volatility, stagflation, et cetera, in the 70s. So Shell had used system dynamics for some strategy planning, and they had put in place a strategy. They had done, I think, various scenarios of extreme scenarios of like how they would react and put in place plans to deal with them. And basically something very much like an extreme scenario happened with the oil prices. And they were ready to capitalize on it. And they were able to do enormously better because of it. And so for years they would have Shell was a big sponsor of SD stuff, would show up at SD conferences and talk about their strategic planning unit and so on. That's one example of many in the corporate world where you'll see these things talked about. And probably Jeff would know, even more of these examples where corporate strategy was defined through use of modeling and proved prescient. I think if you were to put Jeff, myself, and a number of other modelers together, we could probably come up with a half dozen cases that are pretty compelling of that sort, that either they're written up now or there's scattered information about them that they could be written up for a completely compelling sort of case to be made that, yes, this can pay off and it can pay itself back in a big way. I'm thinking about a couple examples, and my biggest question is, are they written up and in an accessible form? So yeah, I mean, that would probably be. So Jeff and I were talking with Cheryl earlier about the importance of something coming out of this boot camp that I think could speak to many of us. What we'd like to do as an enabler for the community is to put together resources that just completely nail why this sort of modeling is needed for certain types of work. It just makes it completely compelling and patent. And there are such examples. There are examples that are just manifest. Yes, you need to do this, and you need to do this through simulation modeling in this sort of way, and these are the results. There's some other resources that were stimulated by a conference Terry and I was at. Lugia was there as well. Winchell, which was this community safety and well-being conference where people were talking about the objections that they were getting, and just putting together a video on sort of responses to common objections. I'm a big believer. I'll tell you. Let me tell you a provocative thing, because we have very little time to share other sort of provocative things. Tomorrow will be spent on projects, etc., and I'll share some comments. It won't be in as big a forum. I will tell you that I think there's a case to be made for modeling in this situation 10 years ago that was very strong, 20 years ago. I think the case for modeling is much stronger yet now with the advent of the data science revolution and big data. I think it's much stronger yet. But I will pose it more strongly than that. I'll pose it in a more prescriptive fashion. I think health organizations, and indeed community safety and well-being more broadly, that does not undertake this modeling is going to be at severe risk for ability to plan and to respond to the 21st century. This was a part of my talk earlier that I didn't get into, but let me tell you the reason for my conviction. I hinted earlier that we increasingly cast digital shadows throughout our lives. We have this kind of digital image of ourselves, a reflection of ourselves that follows us around, whether it's our tweeting or whether it's our smartphone tracking us without our consent via Google or with our consent via, Ethica, or whether it's aspects of our calling behavior or our purchasing behavior or what have you. Situation after situation, we cast these digital shadows. Not only that, but those digital shadows are not merely shadows. They're not merely epiphenomenal. They're a reflection of us, but not anything that influences us. They influence us. People's opinions on vaccination, people's opinions on attitudes toward HPV, vaccination, or attitudes towards health behaviors, towards e-cigarettes, etc. These are hugely shaped by the online presence, online ads, etc. We are increasingly surrounded, so our lives are shaped by electronic media in a profound way. And it's not a small matter. If you think about it, so many health and community safety and well-being issues take place through electronic media. Traditionally in community safety and well-being, they've been concerned about, break-and-enters and so on. Today, hacking, electronic break-and-enters are huge area. Bullying, where does that go on? It goes on online as much as, physically. Harassment, where does it go on? It goes on online on so much. So much of the online world, our exposure to messaging, our exposure to norms, our exposure to attitudes, is mediated by online systems. And yet the data from those online systems, the tremendous volumes of information, we cannot deal with effectively without techniques of advanced analytics, models to help inform us. Our ability to process the sort of data that goes on online, it falls far short of what can be achieved with traditional tools of epidemiology. We need new tools that are computational in nature. And we need tools that are up to the task of making sense of reams of evidence, much like Xiaoyan's presentation gave, with more traditional lines of evidence, or Anahita's with electronic data from search behavior, for example. And increasingly, I think this is going to be a dominant theme. We will be living so much of our lives in this digital world that shapes us by exposure to messaging, by exposure to attitudes, etc., that unless our health organizations get a hold of that, unless our community safety and well-being representatives are able to grapple with that, we'll be at a disadvantage. And it's through computational methods, and it's through methods such as dynamic modeling that we link that with decision-making. Machine learning models to classify things are all well and good, but if you want to link it up with decision-making and ask, in this complex world, what decisions will best achieve our objectives, there you're in the sphere. There you're in the sphere of dynamic modeling. So, in my view, it's not a matter of standing still, whether we should use this modeling or use traditional methods for the current situation. It's in the world we're heading towards. Do we have any option other than using advanced computational tools to help us grapple with this cacophony of information that's being generated? And what's the loss if we don't? It's profound, because so much of the evidence about exposures, behaviors, attitudes, beliefs, indeed, about risk factors is captured in this online sphere. And so it's not a matter of just a luxury to deal with this and to deal with these nice models that process it. I think this is going to be a defining feature of public health in the 21st century, getting a handle on the fact that, well, there's a need to deal with things with boots on the ground. There's also a need to deal with this whole electronic sphere that surrounds us. And by dealing with that in a judicious way, in a careful way, we're going to have tons of evidence that we can marshal that will help us make better decisions. But to use that evidence judiciously, we need advanced computational tools. And the key tool to address decision-making for counterfactuals is dynamic modeling. That's my case. So I think we're rushing headlong into a world where if we don't change, if we stick with same old, we're going to put ourselves at grievous disadvantage with great cost to population health and to our health, the effectiveness of our health services. That's right. That's exactly right. So I cast these digital shadows, but these digital shadows are not merely shadows. It's a digital world that influences us. It's like we have, and there's terms for this that's been coined that I'm not coming up with right now, but it's like we have, this extended digital presence, and that digital presence can be as powerful as affecting things. My attitudes on vaccination may be affected by some person in, hundreds of thousands of miles away in a way that's pretty profound and that shapes my decision-making behavior about children's vaccination. Right? So, I think we're going to be dragged kicking and screaming into the 21st century, and we might as well get with the program to deal with these challenges with the tools that they require to deal with them, because they will require a new type of tool to complement the existing tools in the health science toolbox to allow us to address even the basic health problems of the 21st century. That's my conviction. But what I was saying is if we could put together resources to make this compelling case, that would be a contribution that can enable many people in these boot camps to then move forward with greater confidence. Very good. Any other final things? Friends, the hour is late. There's so many things I would like to have covered additionally. But I will be here tomorrow. I'll be here with you tomorrow. I'm hoping, for those of you who can make it, to identify many models in our stable that are of interest to you, to help advise you on where these model ideas can go, to help shape any that have taken shape during the boot camp, and to help you on your journey of modeling. Sure. That'll be intriguing.
Because we'll have access to these hundreds of models, but to use them as a learning opportunity,
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, so I like that idea. I also want to, just knowing what people are here, I'd like to think, okay, what models there are relevant? What models should they be sure to look at? Maybe not relevant in all their details, but there's some nub of what's in there that's relevant. Yeah, I'd like to do it better. I mean, I generate these models, right? In boot camps and other phenomena, et cetera. And it would be nice if I could route those to people who are interested. It would be nice if there were a queue of people like, feed me models on X, and I could put things into it's like the mouth of the toy,
crux of your hackathon that 5 people look at a model and come up with their interpretations of what the scenario
Yeah.
that these models cover.
That's an idea. Yeah, that's a nice idea. Yeah, that's an interesting idea. Like, where would this be relevant? Yeah. Maybe I'll try to get the Oculus here tomorrow. Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Thank you, everyone, and I hope to see many of you. So Christine asked me what time tomorrow. I said 9. She said that people want rest, so we'll do 10. We'll do 10. I would note that I'm not averse to a bit of rest myself. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Too kind.